Alan Pierce stood at the corner of Maple Avenue, waiting for the crosswalk signal to change. The early morning crowd hurried past him, a sea of faces focused on getting to work. The spring air felt cool and fresh, a welcome change from the harsh winter that had just ended. Alan checked his watch. He was running early for his first day at the new research facility across town. Among the crowd was Lily Wright, a 16-year-old girl carefully making her way through the mass of people with the help of her crutch. Born with a rare muscular condition, Lily had learned to navigate the world with determination despite her physical limitations. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her backpack hung heavily on her shoulders as she moved toward the crosswalk with practiced patience. The crowd pushed and moved around her like water flowing around a stone in a stream. Most people gave her space. Some offered quick smiles, but most were too busy with their own thoughts to really notice her. This was normal for Lily. She didn't mind being invisible most of the time. As Lily approached the crosswalk where Alan waited, a tall man in an expensive suit caught her attention. Frank Daniels, a mid-level executive at the city's largest tech company, was having a bad morning. His boss had just texted him about a mistake in yesterday's presentation. Frank's promotion was now in question, and his anger needed somewhere to go. Frank noticed the girl with the crutch moving slowly in front of him. Something about her careful movements irritated him. Why did she have to be so slow when he was in such a hurry? The crosswalk signal was about to change, and she was blocking his path. Perhaps it was the stress of his upcoming performance review or simply his own meanness. But in a moment that would forever change their lives, Frank deliberately extended his foot and kicked away Lily's crutch as she passed by. The metal support slid across the concrete sidewalk with a scraping sound that made nearby pedestrians turn their heads. The girl tumbled to the ground, her backpack spilling open. Books, pens, and a small electronic device that looked unlike anything Alan had ever seen scattered across the sidewalk. "Watch where you're going," Frank said with a smirk before walking away, chuckling to himself as the light changed. He strode across the street without looking back, pleased with himself in a way that made no sense to anyone watching. The crowd around Lily paused for just a moment. Some people looked shocked, others uncomfortable, but within seconds most continued on their way, pretending they hadn't seen what happened. The moment of cruelty became just another urban incident best ignored. Alan, however, couldn't move past. Something about the man's deliberate cruelty froze him in place. Then, without thinking further, he rushed to help Lily. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her and gathering her scattered belongings. As he picked up her books, he noticed they were advanced physics texts, far beyond high school level. Strange symbols filled the margins in handwriting that seemed too precise to be human. "I'm fine," Lily said quietly, though her face showed pain. "Thank you for stopping. Most people don't." As Alan helped her collect her things, he noticed something unusual about her. Her eyes, when they caught the morning sunlight, seemed to have a strange, almost luminescent quality to them, a purple-blue shade that he'd never seen in anyone before. And her skin, though it appeared normal at first glance, had an unusual smoothness to it. "That guy was a complete jerk," Alan said, handing her the strange electronic device that had fallen from her bag. It hummed slightly in his hand, and the surface seemed to respond to his touch, lighting up with symbols similar to those in her books. Lily quickly took the device and tucked it away. "Some people don't understand the consequences of their actions," she replied with an odd calm that seemed out of place given what had just happened. "But they will." There was something in the way she said those last three words that made Alan's skin prickle. It wasn't a threat exactly, but a certainty that seemed beyond her years. "Can I help you get somewhere?" Alan offered, helping her to her feet and retrieving her crutch. "No need," Lily said, straightening herself with dignity. "I'm stronger than I look." As she adjusted her grip on the crutch, Alan noticed a thin metallic band around her wrist with the same strange symbols he'd seen in her books. For a brief moment it pulsed with a blue light, and Lily's stance became more stable. "I'm Alan, by the way," he said, suddenly curious about this unusual girl. "Lily Wright," she replied with a small smile. "Thank you for your kindness, Alan. It's good to know there are still decent humans in this city. Something about the way she said humans struck Alan as odd. But before he could think more about it, his phone buzzed. It was a reminder about his new job orientation. He was going to be late if he didn't hurry. "I have to go, but are you sure you're okay?" he asked, still concerned. "I will be," Lily said, her strange eyes meeting his. "And so will you. But that man..." She looked in the direction Frank had gone. "He has much to learn." With that, Lily began walking away, her movements surprisingly fluid despite her need for the crutch. Alan watched her for a moment before hurrying across the street himself, barely making the light. As he walked toward his new workplace at the research center, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. The girl's eyes, her strange devices, the unusual way she spoke, it all seemed important somehow. And what had she meant about the rude man having much to learn? Little did Alan know that his first day at the Galactic Integration Bureau, government agency so secret that few civilians knew it existed, would soon connect back to this strange morning encounter. As he approached the unmarked building and scanned his new ID badge, he couldn't possibly know that the girl with the crutch would turn his understanding of the world upside down. And Frank Daniels, now sitting in his office and already forgetting about the girl he'd knocked down, had no idea that his simple act of cruelty would soon lead to consequences beyond his imagination. The universe, it turned out, had ways of teaching lessons to those who refused to learn them through kindness. In 3 days' time, everything would change for all of them. But for now, the city continued its morning rush, unaware that among its citizens walked visitors from much farther away than anyone could guess. Visitors who took very seriously the way humans treated each other. 3 days after the incident, Alan couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the strange eyes. His new job at the Galactic Integration Bureau kept him busy, but Lily's face remained in his thoughts. There was something about her that didn't seem quite normal, and working at a place that dealt with the unusual made Alan pay attention to such things. The Galactic Integration Bureau occupied 8 floors of an unmarked building downtown. From the outside, it looked like any other office building with tinted windows and a plain lobby. But inside, it was one of the most secure facilities on Earth. Alan had spent his first 3 days learning about security protocols, signing papers, about secrecy, and getting used to seeing things that most humans never would. As a junior researcher, Alan had access to certain classified files. His job was to study potential alien technology that might be appearing in civilian areas. The Bureau had existed for 5 years, ever since first contact had been made with 3 alien species who had been observing Earth for decades. This information was still hidden from the public. The world governments had decided that humanity wasn't ready for the shock. Only those with proper clearance knew that aliens not only existed, but were already living among humans in small numbers. During his lunch break, Alan sat alone in the cafeteria, thinking about Lily again. The strange device that had fallen from her bag, the unusual symbols in her books, her eyes that seemed to change color in the sunlight, it all pointed to something beyond ordinary human experience. On a hunch, Alan returned to his desk and accessed the Bureau's database of known alien visitors. Clearance level 2 wasn't much, but it let him run basic facial recognition searches. "This is probably nothing," he muttered to himself as he entered what he remembered of Lily's features. "She's just an unusual kid." The computer hummed as it searched through thousands of registered aliens currently living on Earth. Alan expected no results. He was new, still learning the ropes, and his hunch was based on a brief meeting with a stranger. Then his screen flashed green. Match found. Alan sat up straight, suddenly alert. On his screen was Lily's face listed under her Earth name, Lily Wright. But her true name was much longer, Lil Anareth Virithian, daughter of the Akrelian diplomat to Earth. "No way," Alan whispered, reading further. The Akrelians were the 3rd species to make contact with Earth. Unlike the other 2 species who looked almost exactly like humans, Akrelians needed special technology to blend in. Their natural form was taller and more slender than humans, with skin that changed color based on emotions, and eyes that glowed slightly in certain light. The file explained that Akrelians had difficulty moving in Earth's gravity, which was much stronger than on their home planet. Many used support devices that looked like normal human mobility aids. Lily's crutch wasn't just for show, she genuinely needed it to walk comfortably on Earth. But what really caught Alan's attention was the section on Akrelian culture. The file described them as an ancient species with strong moral codes. They were known across the galaxy for two things: their advanced technology and their unwavering commitment to what they called educational justice. In their culture, deliberate cruelty was never punished with violence. Instead, offenders experienced balanced consequences that taught them empathy. These consequences were never permanent or harmful, but were designed to create understanding through direct experience. Alan remembered Lily's words about the man who had kicked her crutch. He has much to learn. With growing concern, Alan realized what might be happening. If Lily or her family decided to apply Akrelian justice to Frank Daniels, the man might be experiencing some kind of educational consequence right now. And since the existence of aliens was still classified, any unexplainable event could threaten the careful balance of human-alien relations. Alan needed to find Frank Daniels. Fast. Using the Bureau's resources required careful steps. Alan couldn't just look up a civilian without reason. He submitted a formal request citing possible alien technology exposure to an unaware civilian as the reason. It wasn't exactly a lie. While waiting for approval, Alan remembered something else about their encounter. The device that had fallen from Lily's bag. It had looked similar to some of the technology samples he'd been shown during orientation. It might have been a personal field generator, used by Akrelians to slightly adjust gravity around themselves. His computer pinged, the request had been approved, and Frank Daniels' information appeared on screen. He worked at Novatech Industries as a marketing executive. His home address and phone number were listed, along with basic personal data. Alan wrote down the information and checked the time. His shift would end in 20 minutes. He could visit Frank's home address afterward, but what would he say? "Hello, I think you might be experiencing alien justice because you kicked an extraterrestrial diplomat's daughter." That would sound crazy, and it would break every security protocol at the Bureau. As Alan considered his options, his supervisor walked by. "Everything okay, Pierce? You look worried." "Just focusing on some data," Alan answered quickly, closing the file on his screen. "Good. By the way, there's a meeting tomorrow about public health anomalies might be relevant to your research area. Room 408, 9 o'clock. After his supervisor left, Alan opened his computer again and searched public health anomalies. Recent hospital reports showed several cases of unexplained temporary disabilities. People suddenly losing muscle strength with no medical cause. All tests coming back normal, but patients unable to walk without support. One name on the list of recent hospital admissions stood out: Frank Daniels. Alan sat back in his chair, the pieces coming together. Frank had kicked away an Akrelian's support device, and now he couldn't walk without support himself. This wasn't coincidence. It was Akrelian educational justice in action. As Alan gathered his things to leave for the day, he made a decision. He would visit the hospital rather than Frank's home. He needed to see for himself what was happening, and he needed to make sure the situation didn't escalate in a way that might expose alien presence on Earth. What had started as a simple act of cruelty on a city street was now something much bigger, something that could affect relations between Earth and the stars. And somehow Alan Pierce, just 3 days into his new job, was caught in the middle of it all. Frank Daniels woke up in the hospital room feeling strange. This was the second day since his body had suddenly stopped working right. His limbs felt heavy and weak, like they belonged to someone else. The simple act of sitting up in bed took all his strength. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the sterile white walls and the medical equipment surrounding his bed. A nurse had just left after checking his vital signs, telling him that everything looked normal. But Frank knew there was nothing normal about suddenly losing the ability to walk properly. He reached for the glass of water on his bedside table, his hand shaking with effort. How could all the tests show nothing wrong when he could barely hold a cup? The door to his room opened and Dr. Martinez walked in, holding a tablet with Frank's medical records. "Good morning, Mr. Daniels. How are you feeling today?" The doctor asked, looking at Frank with professional concern. "How do you think I'm feeling?" Frank snapped. "I still can't walk without help. Have you figured out what's wrong with me yet?" Dr. Martinez sighed. "Mr. Daniels, we've run every test we can think of. Blood work, MRIs, nerve conduction studies. Everything comes back normal. There's no medical explanation for your sudden weakness." "That's impossible," Frank said, his voice rising with frustration. "People don't just lose the ability to walk for no reason." "I understand your frustration," the doctor replied calmly. "We're going to continue monitoring you, but in the meantime, I'm recommending you use a mobility aid to help you get around." A nurse entered the room carrying a metal crutch. Frank stared at it in shock, memories flooding back. 3 days ago, he had kicked away a girl's crutch on the street. He had laughed as she fell. And now here he was, being handed a crutch of his own. "This can't be happening," Frank whispered. "I know this is difficult," Dr. Martinez said, misunderstanding Frank's reaction. "But with physical therapy and the proper support, you'll be able to maintain your independence while we figure this out." After the doctor left, Frank sat alone, staring at the crutch leaning against his bed. Was this some kind of cosmic joke? Or was there a connection between what he had done and what was happening to him now? No, that was crazy thinking. It had to be a strange coincidence. There was no way the girl he'd knocked down could have caused this. Frank was scheduled for his first physical therapy session that afternoon. With great effort, he managed to get dressed in the clothes his assistant had brought from his apartment. Using the crutch, he made his slow way down the hospital corridor toward the elevator. Each step was a struggle. His muscles seemed to work just enough to move with the crutch's support, but not enough to walk normally. Frank felt people watching him as he passed, some with pity, others trying not to stare. He hated it. He was used to being the one people looked up to, not down on. As Frank waited for the elevator, he noticed a young woman sitting in the waiting area across the hall. When he glimpsed her face, his heart nearly stopped. It was her, the girl whose crutch he had kicked away. She was sitting quietly, reading a book, seemingly unaware of his presence. Frank blinked, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him. The girl, Lily, he remembered hearing someone call her, looked up suddenly, as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met across the hospital corridor, and Frank felt a strange sensation, like a voice in his head that wasn't spoken aloud but clearly communicated. "For one lunar cycle, you will experience what I experience daily. This is not punishment, but education." Frank stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. The voice in his head had been clear, yet the girl's lips hadn't moved. She continued to look at him calmly, her unusual eyes seeming to see right through him. The elevator doors opened, and an orderly helped Frank inside. As the doors closed, Frank caught one last glimpse of Lily, who had returned to her book as if nothing unusual had happened. Later that day, after a frustrating physical therapy session where he made little progress, Frank returned to his room to find a visitor waiting for him. The man was of average height with neat brown hair and a serious expression. He wore a plain suit with no identifying features, and he held an ID card that Frank couldn't quite read from his position. "Mr. Daniels," the visitor said, standing as Frank entered the room. "My name is Alan Pierce. I work for a government agency, and I need to speak with you about what's happening to you." Frank eyed the stranger suspiciously as he lowered himself carefully onto the bed, placing his crutch within reach. "Are you a doctor?" "Because I've had enough doctors poke and prod me." With no answers, Frank said bitterly. "I'm not a doctor," Alan replied, taking a seat in the chair beside the bed. "But I may have some insight into your condition that medical science can't provide." Frank laughed without humor. "Let me guess. You're going to tell me it's all in my head? Psychosomatic?" "No," Alan said seriously. "I believe your condition is very real. It's just not entirely natural." This caught Frank's attention. "What does that mean?" Alan leaned forward, lowering his voice. Mr. Daniels, do you remember an incident 3 days ago on the corner of Maple Avenue involving a girl with a crutch? Frank's face paled. How could this stranger know about that? Who are you really? Frank demanded. I told you my name is Alan Pierce. I work for the Galactic Integration Bureau. It's an agency most people don't know exists. And I was there that morning when you kicked that girl's crutch away. What does that have to do with anything? Frank asked defensively, though a growing sense of unease was building in his stomach. Everything, Alan said simply. Because that girl, Lily Wright, isn't who or what you think she is. And what's happening to you isn't a medical condition. It's a consequence. As the afternoon light faded outside the hospital window, Alan began to explain things to Frank that would change his understanding of the world forever. Things about visitors from other worlds, about justice that teaches rather than punishes, and about how the simple act of cruelty he had committed against a seemingly helpless girl had set in motion events beyond his imagination. For the first time in his adult life, Frank Daniels was completely speechless. Frank stared at Alan with wide eyes as the truth settled over him. Aliens were real. They lived on Earth, and he had kicked one of them. So you're telling me that girl, Lily, is actually some kind of alien diplomat's daughter? Frank asked, gripping his hospital blanket tightly. Alan nodded. Yes, she's a Krellian. Their home planet has much less gravity than Earth, which is why they need support to walk here. The crutch you kicked away wasn't just for show. She actually needs it. Frank sat back against his pillows, trying to process this information. And now they've done something to me? Made me weak like her? Is this some kind of revenge? Not revenge, Alan corrected. Akrelians don't believe in punishment. They believe in education through direct experience. They call it proportional justice. You're experiencing what Lily experiences every day on Earth. Difficulty moving in a gravity that's not natural to your body. Frank looked down at his weakened legs. How long will this last? According to my research, 1 lunar cycle. About a month, Alan said. After that, you'll return to normal, but the experience is meant to stay with you. Why are you telling me all this? Isn't it supposed to be some big government secret that aliens exist? Frank asked. Alan adjusted his tie nervously. Technically, yes, I could lose my job for this, but I'm concerned about the bigger picture. How you respond to this experience matters. The Akrelians are watching, and your reaction could affect human-Akrelian relations. Frank scoffed. So I'm some kind of test case? Great. Think of it as an opportunity, Alan suggested. You have a chance to learn something most humans never will. The next morning, Frank was discharged from the hospital. The doctors had no reason to keep him since all his tests were normal, despite his obvious difficulty walking. He was given the crutch, some physical therapy exercises, and told to follow up in a week. Frank's luxurious apartment, which had once seemed so perfect, now felt like an obstacle course. The steps at the entrance were hard to navigate. The plush carpet grabbed at his crutch. Even simple tasks like showering or making coffee became challenging exercises. He had called in sick, to work, unable to face his colleagues in his weakened state. Frank had always prided himself on his strength and confidence. Now both were being tested in ways he never imagined. On the 3rd day after leaving the hospital, Frank decided he needed to get out of his apartment. The walls were closing in on him, and he was running out of food. There was a small grocery store just a block away. Surely he could manage that. The journey proved harder than expected. The sidewalk was uneven in places. People rushed past him, sometimes bumping him accidentally. At one point, a group of teenagers nearly knocked him over, too busy looking at their phones to notice him. Sorry, man, one of them said, barely glancing back. Frank felt a flash of anger, then shame as he remembered how he had treated Lily. Was this how she felt every day? Invisible, vulnerable, at the mercy of strangers, attention or lack thereof. Inside the grocery store, new challenges awaited. He couldn't carry a basket and use his crutch at the same time. Reaching items on higher shelves was nearly impossible. When he dropped a can of soup, it rolled away, and he stood helplessly watching. it unable to bend down easily to retrieve it. An older woman picked it up for him. "Here you go, dear," she said kindly, placing it in his small shopping bag. "Thank you," Frank said, genuinely grateful for this small act of kindness. As he struggled to the checkout line, Frank spotted a familiar face. Alan Pierce was shopping in the same store. "Mr. Daniels," Alan said, approaching him. "How are you?" "Managing." Frank gave a bitter laugh. "Not well, everything is 10 times harder than it should be." Alan nodded sympathetically. "That's part of the lesson, I think. Most of us take for granted how easily we move through the world." "I never thought about it before," Frank admitted. "How people with disabilities have to navigate spaces that weren't designed for them." Together they left the store and found a bench where Frank could rest. The spring sun warmed their faces as they sat in silence for a moment. "You know what's strange?" Frank said finally. "Yesterday, I was waiting to cross the street, and a man rushed past me, almost knocking me over. I wanted to yell at him, but then I realized that was me a week ago. I was that guy, too busy and self-important to notice who I might hurt." Alan smiled slightly. "Sounds like the CHUCKLIng education is working." "I still don't understand why." "They're on Earth," Frank said. "Why all the secrecy?" "Global governments decided humans weren't ready for the truth," Alan explained. "The plan is for gradual integration. Small groups of aliens living among us, learning our ways while we learn theirs. Eventually, when the time is right, the truth will be revealed to everyone." "And when will that be?" "When we prove we're ready," Alan said simply. "When encounters like yours with Lily become the exception, rather than the rule." The conversation was interrupted by Frank's phone ringing. It was his boss, demanding to know when he would return to work. The company needed him for an important client presentation next week. His absence was causing problems. After ending the call, Frank looked worried. "I can't go back like this. My whole career is based on appearing strong, commanding respect. If they see me struggling with a crutch..." "Maybe that's another part of the lesson," Alan suggested, "seeing how people treat you differently when you appear vulnerable." Frank thought about this. His entire adult life had been built around projecting an image of strength and success. He drove an expensive car, wore designer suits, lived in a luxury apartment, all to show the world he was someone important, someone to be respected. But now, with his fancy clothes and confident stride stripped away, who was he? And more importantly, how would people see him? "I have to go back," Frank decided. "I can't hide forever, and maybe I need to see this through to understand the full experience." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Frank realized that this strange punishment, no, education, was changing him in ways he never expected, and he was only a quarter of the way through his month of living in Lily's shoes. Exactly 1 month after Frank had kicked away Lily's crutch, he woke up feeling different. Something had changed during the night. He moved his legs experimentally and felt strength where there had been weakness. His arms no longer felt heavy when he pushed himself up from the bed. The CHUCKLIng education was over. Just as Alan had predicted, the lunar cycle had passed, and Frank's body was his own again. Frank stood up without reaching for the crutch that had been his constant companion for the past month. He walked around his bedroom, testing his restored strength, feeling almost dizzy with the ease of movement. Part of him wanted to celebrate, to call everyone he knew and announce his recovery. But a deeper part, a part that had grown during his month of living with disability, felt quiet and thoughtful. Frank walked to the window and looked out at the city below. The same streets he had once rushed through without noticing others now looked different to him. He saw the uneven sidewalks, the narrow doorways, the world built for people who moved easily through it. His phone rang. It was Alan. "It's over, isn't it?" Alan asked without preamble. "Your strength has returned." "Yes," Frank confirmed. "How did you know?" "The timing. CHUCKLIans are very precise. 1 lunar cycle exactly as promised." Frank was silent for a moment. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Alan replied. The education is complete. What you do with what you've learned is your choice. After hanging up, Frank got dressed for work. He put on his usual expensive suit, but something felt wrong. The person he had been before didn't fit anymore, like clothes that had shrunk in the wash. At the office, people greeted his recovery with a mix of relief and curiosity. No one knew what to make of his mysterious month-long disability or its equally mysterious cure. Frank answered their questions vaguely, focusing instead on catching up with work. But by lunchtime, he had made a decision. He knocked on his boss's door. "Do you have a minute?" Frank asked. His boss looked up, surprised. "Of course, good to have you back at full strength. The Westfield account needs your attention." "I want to propose a new initiative," Frank interrupted, "about accessibility in the workplace and in our product designs." His boss blinked in confusion. "That's not really your department, Frank." "I know. But I think it should be everyone's concern. I've been doing some research during my recovery." This wasn't exactly true, but Frank had spent many hours during the past month thinking about how the world could be better designed for people with different abilities. "We could start small," Frank continued. "Make our office more accessible, review our products to ensure they can be used by everyone. It would open up new markets and show social responsibility." His boss leaned back, studying Frank with new interest. "This doesn't sound like you, Frank. You've always been focused on the bottom line, not social causes." "People change," Frank said simply. 2 days later, Frank found himself sitting in a small cafe near the Galactic Integration Bureau. Alan had arranged the meeting, though he wouldn't say why. When Alan walked in, he wasn't alone. Lily was with him. Frank felt his heart rate increase as they approached his table. He stood up awkwardly, unsure of the proper greeting. "Hello, Frank," Lily said, her strange eyes looking directly into his. "May we join you?" They sat down, and for a moment, no one spoke. Frank noticed that Lily still used her crutch, though she moved with grace despite her limitation. "I wanted to thank you," Frank said finally. "Not for what you did to me, though I understand it now, but for what you taught me." Lily tilted her head slightly. "The lesson was yours to learn or reject. Many humans choose to reject it." "I almost did," Frank admitted. "The first week I was angry. I wanted revenge, but then I started to see the world differently." Alan watched their exchange with interest, saying nothing. "I've spoken with my father," Lily said. "The Acrelian ambassador. He's been looking for humans who might help bridge our worlds when the time comes for public disclosure." Alan suggested, "You might be such a person." Frank looked surprised. "Me? I was terrible to you." "And then you learned. That ability to change, to grow beyond one's mistakes. It's something we Acrelians value highly." Lily smiled slightly. "Especially in species as young as humanity." "The Bureau is forming a new division," Alan explained, "focused on preparing the public for eventual contact. We need people who understand both worlds." Frank thought about his comfortable job, his corner office, his carefully planned career path. Then he thought about the past month, the struggles, the revelations, and most importantly, the perspective he had gained. "I would be honored to help," he said. 6 months. Later, Frank stood nervously in front of a small audience at a private event hosted by the Galactic Integration Bureau. The room was filled with a mix of humans with high security clearances and aliens in human disguise. As one of the few humans who had experienced Acrelian justice firsthand, he had been asked to share his experience. "A year ago, I was a man who could walk past suffering without a second thought," Frank began, his voice steady. "I judged others by their usefulness to me, not their inherent worth. I saw difference as weakness." In the front row, Lily sat watching him, her crutch leaning against her chair. Next to her was Alan, now heading the Bureau's Public Education Division. "Then I experienced what it's like to navigate a world that wasn't built for you," Frank continued. "I learned that strength isn't about physical power or social status. True strength is adapting, persisting and maintaining dignity in a world that often ignores your needs. As Frank spoke, he saw nods of understanding from both the humans and aliens in the audience. Perhaps that was the most important lesson. Beneath their different exteriors, all intelligent beings shared common needs: respect, understanding, and the chance to be seen as they truly were. The day is coming when all of humanity will learn they are not alone in the universe, Frank said, concluding his speech. When that day comes, I hope we will be judged not by our past mistakes, but by our capacity to learn from them. As applause filled the room, Frank caught Lily's eye. She gave him a slight nod of approval. The man who had once kicked away her, Crutch now stood as a bridge between worlds, his previous arrogance replaced with hard-earned wisdom. The universe, it seemed, had a strange but effective way of teaching its lessons.